All right, do you want to get down to the nitty-gritty? Nacho Libre, Jack Black. I shouldn't do another video about this today, but I'm excited about it. I'm fired up. I got me a cup of coffee. I think we're going to talk about this on the Leak Project, so be looking for that. So let's rock right into this. Let's talk about physical changes in Paul McCartney. Physical changes from Paul to fall. Again, I talked about Tina Foster last time. We've had her falling out, but she's had some good information. She's written extensively about what she sees, and many others, as physical changes in Paul McCartney, beginning around late 1966 and early 1967. I don't know why I can't adjust my chair before I turn on the camera. It's just one of those things. I'll start doing it. Foster sees these as evidence that he was killed and replaced by a double. Me, I see these as evidence. But of what? Well, we're going to get into it. I'm quoting Foster, Tina Foster. And she says, my research indicates that Paul McCartney was replaced in late August 1966. I'm confident that it was Paul during the August 1966 Memphis interview. And I was reviewing that just a couple minutes ago, and I'm like, wait a minute. What proves to be his last or second to last interview happened in Memphis, which is where Elvis just happened to have been born. And it happened on August 16th or August 19th. Well, Elvis would die in that city on August 16th. And those of you that know anything about numerology know that a 9 and a 6, they can just be turned right side up, upside down, inverted. And it's kind of the same number. So when you think about that, this next to last appearance was 3 days before the date on which Elvis would eventually die, and in the same city. I mean, this is a picture of the interview, and we'll see if we can't zoom in on Mr. McCartney there a little bit. Let's see if this will work. Yeah, how about that? It's a terrible picture. It's an old picture, but you zoom in on it a little bit anyway, huh? And there's McCartney. This is the Memphis interview in 1966. Interesting. Okay. So let's go back out. And then, not too far, Jeff. Come on now. Yeah, I'm going to get some better stuff. We'll make this easier to do. And she thinks he was different. She thinks it was Paul McCartney in Memphis and in Seattle on August 25. Here's a picture of the Seattle appearance. So his last appearance would have been in the city where Jimi Hendrix would later be buried. So this is too much coincidence. The shadowy ones love their number play, and here it is on full display. So, I mean, even, if it's not, they're signaling to us that something big was going to happen with McCartney. Pardon me. Now, Foster says that Paul seems different during the 28 August 1966 LA interview. During the August interview, Paul keeps putting his hands up to his face so as to casually hide it, as though self-conscious and maybe trying to prevent anyone from noticing subtle differences between him and Paul. So is the Paul of August 28th just a Paul impersonator? He does a great job, she says, but if you watch, you pick up subtle differences. She believes that it is in fact a double on August 28, and therefore she believes that the time frame for Paul's replacement is between August 19 of 1966 and August 28th of 1966. So about a 9-day period where they rolled out the old and rolled in the new. So this would be real Paul. Just kind of checking him out. This would be real Paul. And then this guy would be the imposter. So interesting. These are Tina Foster's conclusions. Now, regardless of whether or not she's correct in these assertions, It cannot be reasonably denied that there's a great deal of photographic evidence that exists that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for any objective observer to dispute that significant physical changes can be seen in Paul McCartney around late 1966 and the Sgt. Pepper album. It is very difficult. In these assertions, it cannot be possibly denied that a great deal of photographic evidence exists that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for any objective observer to deny that there's physical changes. Additionally, now this is going to blow your mind, Foster cites what proves to be a very compelling biometric analysis of McCartney before and after 1966, completed by Italian forensic researchers. Not just crazy fans, but Italian forensic researchers, Francesco Gavazzini and Gabriella Carlisi. This analysis concluded that there were discrepancies in McCartney's facial features that could not be accounted for by error or plastic surgery. I recommend that you look these names up, or you can look at here. It's in the August 2009 Italian edition of Wired magazine. So it's not some crazy conspiracy publication. It's the 2009 August Italian Wired magazine, and that came from Tina Foster, plasticmaca.blogspot.com. Now, I personally find the assertions of Foster to be fascinating. When I did have a radio show, I had her on at least 2 or 3 times. But I have to ask if there's a more plausible explanation for the physical changes than Paul McCartney being murdered and replaced. I mean, they replaced him with a guy that just happened to be the greatest musician ever. She and her followers in the PID, or the Paul Is Dead movement, have identified strange anomalies in the life of Paul McCartney that certainly do demand explanation. And my cat demands to lay on my feet right now, which is always interesting. For my part, I find the explanations on the right track, but I think their train has arrived at the wrong station. So let's take a look at these actual physical discrepancies between Paul before and after 1966. Thank you, Rooney. I appreciate that. You're moving on. So Foster and several others have pointed out the marked difference in the eyebrows of McCartney of 1964 and after. Now, I am not an expert on eyebrows. As you can see, I don't really have them. They're just so lightly colored, and I don't really have much of them. But the photos I've looked at do seem to rather clearly show that Paul's eyebrows dramatically flattened, almost to the point of inversion during these years. Now, I don't know much about eyebrows, but I'm a fairly good researcher. So the shapes of eyebrows can easily be changed by cosmetic means, but it's always in the opposite direction of the changes in McCartney's eyebrows. You don't mind me editing the book as we go, do you? While it's obviously rather simple to cosmetically lift, round, and shape eyebrows from flatter to more arched, efforts to do the reverse seem profoundly problematic to me. And not only to me, but to the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health. They did an eyebrow study. Really? And we probably paid for it with our tax dollars. Unlike other areas in the body where there is descent of soft tissues, there is a paradoxical elevation of eyebrows with aging. These findings explain why surgical elevation of the mid and medial brow provides results that are neither youthful nor aesthetically pleasing. Techniques that selectively elevate the lateral brow are more likely to have a rejuvenating effect. So eyebrows go up with age. They don't go down. If anything, we could expect eyebrows to lift with age. So it appears that Paul's eyebrows acted in a medically paradoxical fashion. That, my friends, is an observable fact that I think demands explanation. So, young Paul, high arched eyebrows. Older Paul, flat eyebrows. This does not happen medically. It doesn't go from this to this. It would go from this to this, if anything. Eyebrows arch with age. That's just photographs, my friends. Those are just photographs. Not to mention the nose difference and the mouth difference and the ears difference and the eyes difference, but we'll get to some of that. But they don't go from this to this. They go from this to this, if anything. Now, many researchers have also held that McCartney's eye color has changed from dark brown to light green. And again, there's compelling photographic evidence. Young McCartney, clearly dark brown eyes. Older McCartney definitely possessed a green or possibly light hazel eyes. And guess what? Yes, I found an eye study as well. Jeff, what do you do all day long? Study about eyes and eyebrows, make videos, stuff like that. The Wall Street Journal published an article, and not in by, but they published an article by Heidi Mitchell in 2014 that discussed the color of eyes changing. It discussed the subject of eye color change. The article heavily quoted Dr. Ivan Schwab, a professor of ophthalmology at the University of California, Davis, and a clinical spokesman for the American Academy of Ophthalmology. So it seems like this guy might know a thing or two about peepers, right? He might know a thing or two about eyes and eye color. And to the subject at hand, the good doctor says, eye color doesn't really change. But McCartney's has. Most Caucasians are born with light eyes, but the pigment tends to settle by about a year. Some studies suggest that eye color can change a tad with age, but for most people, eye color is fixed after the first year of life. Eye color doesn't really change. Well, then how come Paul McCartney's eye color has? Somebody tell me. And the emphasis on this is obviously mine. Dr. Schwab does, however, cite some exceptions, such as pregnancy or puberty, where eyes may be known to darken. I'm pretty sure that Paul McCartney did not get pregnant. If he did, then we have a whole new conspiracy. It's the PIP. Paul is pregnant. No, it'd be the PWP. PID Paul is dead. PWP Paul was pregnant. And then, where is the child of the pregnant Paul McCartney? And who was the father or mother of the PWP love child? And where is that child today? Do you think Ringo fathered the love child, or was it John? Or maybe George? I don't know. Sorry, I know this is serious to a lot of people, and it's serious to me. But hey, you got to have some fun sometime. So look for the videos coming up on PWP, Paul was pregnant. But anyway, only in pregnancy or puberty are eyes known to be darkening. But, you know, McCartney was way past puberty. And again, we don't think he was pregnant. But at any rate, medical science seems to dictate that any eye color change, which is highly unlikely, would be from light to dark, the opposite of what can be observed in Paul McCartney. You ready? Dudes, dudettes, dark brown eyes, light eyes, dark brown eyes. Now again, if it had gone from this to this, okay, not so much to talk about. But to go from this to this is old Paul. This is young Paul. This is somebody would call fall. But look at that. There's a difference. It seems to be very clear, very compelling evidence of changes in both the eyebrows and the eye color of Paul McCartney. Experts say these changes are medically impossible. Yet, here they are for all to see. The changes are real. We've seen them. Now, do they prove that Paul McCartney was killed and replaced with a double? Do they prove that Paul McCartney died and has been replaced by a double? Not so fast. Dr. Schwab, remember, the eye doctor expert from the American Board of Ophthalmology and the University of California, Davis. In that same article, he talks about what may prove to be a stunning answer to the McCartney eye color quandary. And no, I'm not going back to Paul is pregnant. Read this. A change of hue can indicate something is wrong. Heterochromia, a condition in which a person's eyes are two different colors, can be inherited or caused by trauma, which could shake loose some of the melanocytes, making the eye appear lighter or darker. So the eye can sometimes be made to appear lighter or darker. Like in the case of Paul McCartney, there is a condition that could allow eyes to go from dark to light, which they medically don't do. But what does it have to be? It has to be this disease, heterochromia, or it has to be trauma, severe trauma, which could shake loose some of the melanocytes. You knew it was the melanocytes, didn't you? I knew it was too, I just didn't want to say. But it can make the eye appear lighter. Heterochromia can also be a sign of disease. Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis, or pigmentary glaucoma. Last stage diabetics may see their eyes darken. Last stage means right before you die, so Paul is not, and again, his eyes lightened. But in all cases, changing eye color is very, very rare. This is a doctor. Very, very rare. And if you do have a change, you need to see an ophthalmologist. Changing eye color is very, very rare. And when it does happen, it goes from light to dark. Paul McCartney, young, dark, old, light. Very, very rare. Wow. So medically speaking, change in eye color is exceedingly rare. Paul's eye color has changed dramatically. Now, my assertion is that McCartney, like Elvis before him, was subject to tremendous MK Ultra Tavistock mind control. Now, could such attacks help explain this medical eye color quandary? If I'm correct, and Paul was subject to severe mind control techniques, could it have, it could certainly, I probably need to change that to could it have provided the trauma that Dr. Schwab says could possibly cause an eye victim's color to lighten? Well, you would think that MK Ultra Tavistock mind control, especially if it was temporal mind control, which I think we've talked about, we'll talk about in the future, warping him across time and space, I think that could create some trauma. And it could, if anything, create enough trauma. It has to be extraordinary trauma to make eyes go from dark to light, because they don't do that medically. So I would think temporal torture, temporal manipulation would qualify as extreme trauma. Now, we've seen in the cases of Gladys and Elvis Presley that the introduction of disease seems to be part and parcel of the MK/Tavistock technique. This could also have created medical reasons that easily account, or that at least account, not easily, because it's not something that's easily done, that account for Paul's change in eye color and eyebrow shape. Wow. Change in Paul's eye color and eyebrow shape. It's just amazing when you think about it, because this kind of stuff should not be able to happen. And we see it happen in Paul McCartney. There's no doubt about it. There's just no doubt about it. We've seen it. It's my assertion that the seemingly obvious change in McCartney's eye color does not require the logical leap to his death and replacement by a double to explain it. In fact, I submit that PID is not the most plausible explanation, and PWP is not the most plausible explanation either. And on we go. Evidence examined thus far makes it much more likely, in my opinion, that the trauma experienced by Paul under MK/Tavistock mind control, and that's MK Ultra and Tavistock combined, that trauma is what precipitated his changes in eye color and eyebrow shape. But wait, there's more. Lip service. Foster, other researchers noted profound difference lips of McCartney 64, 68, and beyond. Again, the differences are antithetical to what we would expect in cosmetic lip alteration. Paul's lips go from fuller to distinctively thinner. Paul's lips go from fuller to distinctively thinner. From the Italian forensic investigation mentioned earlier, we have this. Compared to the previous picture, that of Sergeant Pepper's showed clearly that the commissura lip, that is, the line formed by the lips of the two, it was suddenly stretched. And we're going to show you that picture in a minute. Which obviously is not possible, and that whiskers cannot camouflage. In other words, the phenomenon is all too frequent these days that the lips can be inflated and increased in volume, but the width of the lip commissura cannot vary that much. May be slight, but this is not the case with the photos examined. Here the difference between the before and after is too strong to have been caused by any surgery. So what they're saying is, number one, I'm saying, brother had some big full lips and got now some skinny thin lips. And I mean, this guy's the cutest of all the Beatles. Women love him. They're adoring him. They're falling all over him. Why would he do a bunch of plastic surgery? But then I think of Michael, and okay, not such a great argument. But a great argument is that the lips went from full to thin, which cannot medically happen. Full, thin, thin, full. I'm telling you, dudes. But anyway. Plus, they're saying that this, is it commissura? I don't know. The distance between there and there cannot change, even with surgery. Can't happen. So they're saying from their forensic, biological, in a lab, real doctor stuff study, not some guy on Microsoft Word, a $15 a year screen share program in his desktop, but from there to there is way shorter than from there to there. And they didn't just have these pictures to look at, they had all kinds of medical data. That this can't increase, you can't go from that to that medically. And again, the above photo gives a good look at the differences in the lips and eye color that is most difficult to explain. And again, understand who's making this statement. It's a pair of forensic investigators, not some nerd trolling about the internet at 3 a.m. from his mother's basement. And for the record, I am not in my mother's basement. That's a damn lie. I'm in my own office in the home that I own. Got my name on the title. So there. Let me put that to rest forever. I do take my laundry to my mother's house to wash it, however, because I don't have a washing machine or a dryer yet. Now understand what's being said. We now have testimony from multiple medical experts that the physical changes that we've looked at in Paul McCartney are medical impossibilities. And we haven't even scratched the surface, pardon the pun, of the changes that are cited by researchers. The only possible explanations suggested by these professionals are the ravages of extreme trauma and or disease. So could McCartney's physical proximity to the Tavistock Institute and his regular disappearances from public view for extended periods in 66 and 67 be clues in helping explain his dramatic changes in appearance? Were they working that brother over? And did he maybe have some work done? I mean, if Michael did it, Paul could have done it, right? But he just disappeared. And if you're Paul McCartney, that ain't easy. Could at least some of these disappearances have been against his will? Could some of these disappearances have been used to facilitate intensive, physical, hands-on treatment, i.e. torture, which could have included surgical procedures and other dastardly applications of which, really, we can only speculate, because what we know about government programs, people say it's 5-10 years behind, so who knows, man? And I think I alluded to this earlier. This author is brilliant. Oh, sorry, it's me. It must also be stated that even though Paul was generally considered the most attractive of the Beatles, ego cannot be entirely ruled out. It is within the realm of possibility that McCartney could have had some voluntary plastic surgery. Such procedures could also have been compelled by his controllers. And, you start thinking about, I guess the next one is Michael, right? How was Michael put through the ringer by these guys? So, the conclusion of the only independent and objective scientific investigation of the subject to date speaks rather clearly. The Italian biometrical analysis of Paul McCartney concluded that there were discrepancies in McCartney's facial features that could not be accounted for by error or by plastic surgery. We have, without a doubt, seen changes in Paul McCartney. Changes in height. I didn't even get to that, but I should have. Science says they cannot be accomplished via plastic surgery. And Paul got taller, yo. That just doesn't happen. Anyway, or did he get shorter? I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. Maybe that's coming in the next part of this book. Science says that these changes that we've looked at can't be accomplished via plastic surgery. They can't happen naturally. In fact, they're said to be medical impossibilities. So what did it, and what did it virtually overnight? Is Paul dead? Or is there a better explanation? We've already seen how Gladys Presley underwent significant physiological and physical changes. We've also documented the same thing being perpetrated upon Elvis Presley. And stunningly, check this out, folks. Jeff, what do you do all day? I study shit like this. Do you think there's anybody else in the world that ever compared the timeline of the medical decline of Gladys Presley with that of the physical changes in Paul McCartney? Dude, that's what you call need to get out more. Stunningly, Mrs. Presley's changes seem to have manifested in roughly the same amount of time in which the aforementioned changes in McCartney occurred. Such a pronounced physical alteration in that short a time span is striking. Now, Gladys Presley's changes were aided by alcohol and disease. Was there any documented correlations of substances and or illnesses that could have played a part in McCartney's transformation? Well, you know this story. Queen magazine, June 1967. After I took LSD, it opened my eyes, said Paul McCartney. We only use 1/10 of our brain. Just think what we could accomplish if we could only tap that hidden part. It would mean a whole new world. This is Paul McCartney speaking about LSD in an interview. Notice the date of that interview? Ding, 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 1967. There it is again. 10, 16, 23, 5. These words were spoken in the very midst of his profound physical changes and profound changes in the direction of the Beatles. Gone was that happy-go-lucky Paul of the earlier days, and in his stead had emerged a thinning, brooding, reclusive loner extolling the virtues of LSD. Here's yet another connection, another similarity in the dealings with Elvis and Gladys Presley. Gladys Presley was killed. She was not replaced by a double. Elvis Presley was rendered inert. He was not replaced by a double. My assertion is that Paul McCartney's artistic, social, mental, and physical changes resulted from a similar astral mind control assault as was leveled on Gladys and Elvis Presley. And my assertion is that Paul was not replaced by a double. Occam's broom states that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, and you don't have to make him dead and replaced to get the physical changes that we have noticed. And it sure explains a lot easier how they could have replaced and just happened to get the greatest freaking musician that ever lived, arguably. All right. Let's take a look at this before we finish for another episode. LSD and MK Ultra. And this is, again, documentation. MK Ultra uses numerous methodologies to manipulate people's mental states and alter brain functions, including the surreptitious administration of drugs, especially LSD and other chemicals. This means sneaky. Early CIA even efforts focused on LSD, which later came to dominate many of MK Ultra's programs. HSS.DOE.gov. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Russian spies defect against their will and whether the Russians could do the same to their own operatives. That's from the Search for the Manchurian Candidate. LSD was also administered to CIA employees, military personnel, and that's another thing. Elvis was a military man, and I was in the military. And man, you got a shot record, and it's like a book, man. It's like a book about this size, only it's got like 30 pages in it. And every month they're sending you over to get more and more injections, especially when you go overseas like Elvis did. So who knows what they put in that brother. And, just like I said, again, this author's brilliant. The drugs are usually administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, which happens to be a violation of the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. agreed to follow after World War II, but not with their own bitches, I guess. Sorry, it's late. I shouldn't have let that one slip out. The aim of this was to find drugs which would irresistibly bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program him or her as a robot agent. Rappaport J. 1995, CIA experiments with mind control on children. The Office of Security used LSD in interrogations, but Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who directed MK Ultra, had other ideas. He thought it could be used in covert operations. Lee, M.A., Schlein, B., 1985. Are you starting to see a picture come together? My brothers and my sisters. That was from Acid Dreams, The Complete Social History of LSD, the CIA, the 60s, and Beyond, by M.A. Lee and B. Schlein, published in 1985. Emphasis, mine. That means I put in the bolds and the italices. By 1962, the CIA and the Army had developed a series of super hallucinogens, like the highly touted BZ, Bravo Zulu, which was thought to hold greater promise as a mind control weapon, also from this same study. Anyone that reads the following citations might have to pick their jaw up when coming to the end of that passage. All this done by our government, with our money, hidden from us for years and years and years. Paul McCartney openly admitted his use of LSD, and it becomes much less a leap of logic and deduction to consider that McCartney's sudden, abrupt, inexplicable, personal, professional changes could have been due in part to the LSD that he knew he used, not to mention all the LSD and other stuff that he didn't know he was using, not to mention the astral plane assault on his person. The idea, in fact, becomes eminently plausible in view of the foregoing medical testimony when we uncover the wide use of LSD in conjunction with mind control techniques and assaults as seen above. McCartney was exhibiting dizzying changes in the same time he admits to the usage of LSD. These changes and usage correspond exactly to the period where his profound, medically impossible physical changes manifested. All that's left to any objective researcher is to connect the dots. And I'm in the dot connecting business. And cousin, business is a booming. Now we should also keep in mind that Paul McCartney would have been subjected to attacks that had been refined and improved by testing on both Gladys and Elvis Presley, and likely many other unfortunate victims. Good friend of mine, former Illuminati insider, current shaman and medical doctor who shall remain anonymous for obvious reasons. He's confirmed my suspicions in this matter based on what he claims is direct inside knowledge concerning it. So I went to him and said, Dr. Toltec, that's a misnomer. That's a pseudonym. It's not a misnomer. It's a pseudonym. I know his name, but I'm not telling y'all. As a medical professional, he's been involved in or has witnessed mind control experimentation within the realms of governmental and or para-governmental organizations. And he's worked for one of those organizations that I mentioned earlier, but I'm not going to tell you which one. Got to protect a brother's anonymity. After many hours of consultation with this highly credible insider, it's my studied conclusion that the intense astral mind control assault that Paul McCartney was subjected to could very well account for his changes, even the physical ones. Now, let's talk about this real quick. I know that it's a long video, and some people don't like long videos. We'll go a little bit longer. Time, space, and cross-dimensional abuse. I mean, even a few years ago, the suggestion of such a thing as temporal or cross-dimensional abuse would have been absurd. I talked to one of the producers for Coast to Coast, and they're like, "Really, Jeff? I mean, come on!" And I mean, you got to go out there to be able to have people at Coast to Coast saying, "That sounds a little crazy." I mean, the stuff that they hear, but I'm confident that I will win the day. But anyway, today we know many things are many new things, and today we know many things and are open to many possibilities that we wish we could still dismiss. Yeah. Taking into consideration the profound physical changes in McCartney, considering both medical and forensic expert testimony that all these changes are impossible via plastic surgery, we're forced to look elsewhere for explanations. That Paul is dead and is replaced by a double is one possible explanation. It could have happened that way. Is it, however, the most likely explanation? I say nay. Because we've seen how Gladys Presley underwent massive health and physical changes under mind control attack in roughly the same amount of time that Paul's changes were manifested. We've seen how the personality of Elvis Presley changed dramatically under the same type of assault. Many of Paul McCartney's changes can likewise be explained as shown here in expert testimony. Now, as to the physical changes that cannot be explained by current medical technology, there's still a simpler answer than the one offered by the PID Paul Is Dead school of thought. Paul may very well have been subjected to medical technology that's not known to the public at large. Knowing what we know about the secrets of the military-industrial complex, it's not a huge leap to believe that there's great advances in medical science still hidden from public knowledge. And see, we hadn't even got aliens into this thing, so don't even go there. But taking into consideration the physical changes that can't be explained by biology or current technology, I don't think an objective researcher can completely dismiss the possibility of some sort of time or dimensional or temporal assault. Everything's frequency, and the Beatles taught us that, or at least showed us that. So if time all exists at the same time, and it's just tuning into frequencies, they could warp a brother across frequencies. They could use technologies of the future to mess with people in the past. They could warp you across. Man, who can imagine what the results would be if a person were subject to temporal displacements? What could be the physical results of a man being warped or morphed across time? Could his eyes change impossibly from dark to light? Could his lips change impossibly from fat to thin, from narrow to wide? Could his eyebrows change impossibly from arched to flat? It would seem that impossible changes in eye color, brows, and lips would be the least that we could expect. The physical changes evidenced in Sir Paul McCartney are exactly what one would expect to see as a result of such diabolical experimentation. If man were subject to morphing across dimensions, we might expect similar results. While it certainly is on the fringe of possibility, I consider it infinitely more plausible than a cover-up of the death of possibly the most recognizable person on the planet and his replacement by the greatest musical talent in history that's been able to fool billions while making billions for decades. Not to mention the requisite compliance and silence of the many and sundry individuals such a scenario would have demanded. It's certain that Paul McCartney has exhibited profound changes. Personality, attitude, professional work, physical appearance. It did happen. It has happened. The physical proof is irrefutable. How it happened is the big question that preoccupies our mind. After careful consideration, and for all the reasons covered herein, I'm concluding that the Paul Is Dead school of thought has identified the correct symptoms, but have misdiagnosed the ultimate result. Paul is not dead. Paul is deconstructed. Paul is not dead. Paul was demolished. Paul is not dead, but Paul is damned lucky he survived. We're only on page 74 of 122, so we're going to cut this one right here. Now, we'll finish this up. Sir Paul lives. We're not going to finish up the whole page, but I'm going to finish up this section. I'm convinced that McCartney was not cognitively aware of what happened to him, at least initially. And here's Sir Paul not too long ago, playing his left-handed bass, air bass. My research has led me to further conclude that the realization of what had been done to him did finally dawn on his mind. I believe that he came to grips with what he had done while under the grip of the Dark Lords of M.K. Tavistock. In my estimation, a survey of the behavior of Paul McCartney post-1969 is indicative of a man realizing he'd been used to perpetrate a great injustice and his subsequent efforts to do what he can to make amends in any way possible. I can't help but look at Sir Paul of today as a man trying his best to do what he can to make things right. Jeff, what are you talking about? What do you base that upon? Well, I suspect this is the real reason that the Beatles broke up, was this whole Paul is dead thing and Paul being changed. McCartney woke up to what had happened and could no longer allow himself to be a part of the beast that the band had become. Paul could no longer stand to be a part of what Fall had desecrated. And if you look at his post-Beatles music from Wings to today, it demonstrates to me his commitment to returning to the inspiring music of the pre-Assault Fab Four. Maybe Paul is Dead enthusiasts tell a similar tale, but make either John Lennon or sometimes George Harrison the Beatle with the conscience, unable to perpetuate the great lie any longer. I never was a Beatles fan. I rarely listened to their music before I started this research. And I think that gives me a perspective of objectivity that devoted Beatles fans can't have. My dispassionate position shows McCartney seeing what he'd done and then taking action to correct it. Whether his reason is motivation, whatever his reason or motivation, history is clear that Paul suddenly and immediately terminated any association with the low-frequency Beatles of his own creation. He turned back to Verity tuning upon leaving the Beatles in his solo work with Wings and beyond. My estimation is that this trend continues to this day. In my opinion, Sir Paul McCartney was and is aware of the spiritual battle he was fighting. Why else would he put the kibosh on the most successful band in history? Why else would he immediately stop doing the music they were doing upon the band's demise and immediately return, for the most part, to the music they were doing before Sgt. Pepper? Why would he embrace veganism and allow his billion-dollar worth image to be used by PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, to promote non-cruelty? When I look at Sir Paul McCartney, I see a man that for all the world seems to be trying to atone for his past evils. Even if I'm wrong, and the Paul is Dead folks have it right, the end result was unfortunately the same. The Dark Lords of M.K. Tavistock were able to derail the mass enlightenment of the human population and stave off the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Just past the halfway mark of the 60s, the king was gone, and Paul, for all intents and purposes, was dead. And I want to finish this part up right here, and we're going to be done with this section. We'll do a new episode either later tonight or tomorrow. But Fall isn't quite dead. We see him crop every now and then. McCartney has had a few regrettable public moments, to be sure. But what would we expect to see in a person that was subject to mind control of such intensity and duration? Certainly, you would expect the occasional fall eruption. The main such appearances that springs to mind is McCartney's inexplicable and regrettable public behavior upon the death of John Lennon. This is a guy that was his best friend for many years. How did Paul react? In the moment of stress, I don't think Paul did react. I think Fall reacted. You've probably all seen this video, but on the evening of 9 December, as McCartney was leaving an Oxford Street recording studio, he was surrounded by reporters and asked for his reaction to Lennon's death. He replied, "I was very shocked, this is terrible news," and said that he had spent the day in the studio listening to some material because he just didn't want to sit at home. When asked why, he replied, "I didn't feel like it." And he was I should pull that piece and play it, but I don't want to get zapped on, copyright stuff. He was then asked when he first heard the news. McCartney replied, "In the morning sometime." And one of the reporters said, "Very early?" McCartney said, "Yeah." And then asked the reporters if they all knew. They added, "Yeah." McCartney then said, "Drag, isn't it?" I think this was a reoccurrence of Fall brought on by the great shock and sadness that Paul undoubtedly felt. And if you watch the video footage of that remark, you can see that it's not a man in mourning. It's a man that's quite bored with the whole thing and quite frankly could not have cared less. That man was Fall. I'm convinced that the shock and stress of Lennon's murder had thrown Paul back into the Fall mindset. It's also possible that the tragic event was leveraged by his old controllers to at least attempt to inflict new damage. Later, a little-known event would show us exactly how the real Paul felt about the friend he lost and just how much that friend may have understood about what Paul went through those dark days of fall. We'll be back in our next episode and look at John Lennon and his, what I contend to be, knowledge of the whole situation, his attempts to let us know and his attempts to help Paul, and Paul's recognition of those attempts and express gratitude of them. And this all ties back to that meeting in Bel Air where Elvis told them to watch out for this. Paul didn't listen, John did. And that's another page of history. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. This is all helping you to unwind your mind, unindoctrinate yourself, and in the end, when we put this all together, it'll help us out being excellent to each other and excellent to ourselves. So, unindoctrinate yourself, unwind your mind, guide your own spirit, master your own ascension, be your own guru, and be excellent to each other.